Hello, we are now midway through 2025, so I've gone back and I've looked through everything that I've read so far this year and thought about what are my absolute favorites? What are the books that have made the biggest impacts on me? What do I keep thinking about? What are the books that I keep pushing on other people? And I picked out 10 that I want to recommend to you that I think are really special. And I would love to hear in the comments below, what are the best books that you've read so far this year? What have I been missing out on? And what would you recommend to me? I would love to hear about that. Now, I've not ordered these in any particular way, although I think the first book that I'm going to talk about is my absolute favorite, and it's Days of Light by Megan Hunter. And this story just moved me so much. The way it traces the life of an individual named Ivy from her girlhood on a particular day in the late 1930s throughout her life, and it kind of leaps forward in time to focus on the same particular day of the year, but going into the future, and the way it accounts for how we make a life and what is a life well lived. And even though we are born into particular circumstances and into a particular family, we really forge our own way through life. And as it traces her connection to the natural world and to spirituality and her connections with other people, both romantic and friendship wise, it is so gorgeous. I mean, the writing in this is just so stunning, but also it gives a really different slant on the way that life is lived. There's a line of poetry that she keeps thinking about, which there's a line in this about exquisite risk, and she is someone that she doesn't have any particular artistic flair like her. She comes from a very artistic family, but she isn't especially drawn to painting or to writing, but she connects to and relates to the world in a very different way. And it begins with a very dramatic incident early on in her life when she loses someone, and this kind of has a haunting effect on the rest of her life, but it follows her as she grows up, gets married, has children, and has a long-term affair with another woman. And the way it builds this sense of her life is just so gorgeous. And I was kind of predisposed to like this story because her tale is heavily inspired by the Bloomsbury Group, and I've always had a strong interest in the Bloomsbury Group, and it's kind of a loosely based on particular members of that group, specifically Angelica Garnett, who was the daughter of the painter Vanessa Bell, who is the sister of Virginia Woolf. And all of these figures are kind of loosely fictionalized in this story. And Angelica Garnett had a very dramatic story in her life, her actual life. She married a man who was much older than her, who had known her since her birth, and who was a former lover of her own father. And so these very messy family circumstances, but this isn't sensationalized in this novel at all. Instead, it's given a different way of looking at the past and how this individual of Ivy, this character, grows out of these circumstances into a life of her own. And it does it in such a beautiful and tremendously moving way. We Do Not Part by Han Kan, and it's translated by Yaewon and Paige Aniyah Morris. And this story traces the connection and friendship between two women who are artists and who are haunted by a great tragedy, an act of genocide that occurred in their area of South Korea, and the impact that this has had upon their families and their communities. And this story has such a unsettling and moving effect in thinking about our position in the world and our relationship to history and events which are so horrific. It's almost unfathomable how they actually occurred, and the way it shows their process of considering this and thinking about it in a very considered way. And there's so much beautiful imagery in this, especially of snow and its effect upon the landscape, and the way that this moves into an exploration of memory, and how the narrative itself gradually goes from being a much more realistic story to one that is increasingly surreal and strange. It was so surprising, and but also just had such a big impact on me, and I think Han Kan very rightly won the Nobel Prize for literature, because there is an effect of her writing which I can't even really express or really completely understand, but it's one of those books that after I read it, I know I was kind of changed in some subtle way, and that it's still having a resonance upon me. And so I think this book is absolutely extraordinary. Mothers and Sons by Adam Haslett, and this story considers the relationships between a number of different mothers and sons, but it primarily focuses on two characters of Peter, who is an asylum lawyer living in New York City, and he's in his 40s, and his mother, Anne, who lives in Vermont, and she runs a retreat for women, and they have been estranged for many years. And the narrative switches back and forth to the first person perspective of Peter and a third person perspective focusing on Anne, following their daily lives. But over the course of the story, there is an emotional tale which has been hidden and suppressed for many, many years. And this story is really a reckoning of their relationship to each other, but also their relationships to themselves and how they live their lives. What memories and aspects of their pasts have they suppressed? What are they containing? And what needs to be released? And I found this so moving and emotional, and how this builds up to a much larger tale, I think is so well done, and but also how it gestures at politics today and the issues to do with asylum seekers and people finding a place in the world where they can belong, where they can be accepted. It's a tremendous story. Ootlin by Jenni Fagan, and this is a memoir with writing that is so beautiful and which is a true expression of the author's own inner being, and an exploration of her tragic upbringing and past in the care system, of living in a number of different foster homes, of having her name changed many different times, and feeling like there is no real place for her in the world, but how she discovers a home for herself in literature and writing itself, and the way it captures that experience, I think, is so stunning and powerful and impactful. And there are so many incidents in her past that she recounts that really are heartbreaking, that are so difficult to read about. But the way she frames this experience and an understanding of it within a larger context, I think is incredible and so mature and sophisticated. And it really speaks to how an individual can establish their own place and their own path in life outside of the context of their their difficult circumstances, and it's an absolutely tremendous story. The Adversary by Michael Crummey. This is a historical novel set in Newfoundland in the early to mid 1800s in a coastal town called Mockbeggar, a fictional town where life is really difficult. There is horrific snowy weather, there is disease, there are pirates who raid the coast, and life for the inhabitants of this town is made even more difficult because the individuals who have the controlling influence on the local businesses are a brother and sister, Abe and his sister, the widow Keynes, who have a epic rivalry with each other, and we follow over the course of the story how this rivalry plays out, the reasons for it, and the selfish motives of these individuals, and how their decisions impacts the larger community in a negative way. And the way he creates this sense of community and many different people who are just struggling to survive amidst these larger dramatic conflicts is so both terrifying and entertaining, and it's one of those stories that just gripped me, and I wanted to know what was going to happen, and I formed such a close connection with so many different characters in this story, and throughout all the twists and turns in the story. And it's very clever how it is a kind of modern recreation of a biblical story in a specific setting, and it's a historical account of a particular period, but also the conflicts in it, I think, can be related so much to our situation in politics and events of the world today, and it shows the kind of cyclical nature of these things. And so it's a very clever book on so many different levels, and of course it was made even more endearing to me because this was a book that I read together with my online book club, so we had lots of discussions about it, but also I was incredibly fortunate to be invited to the Dublin Literary Awards, where Michael Crummey won that award, and so had the chance to speak with him and interview him briefly on camera, but we also had a discussion outside of that, and he's just such a lovely and intelligent person, and of course authors don't need to be great people, but it's wonderful when it turns out that they are actual, really lovely people in person as well. So reading this book was a really memorable experience. The Book of Disappearance by Ibtisam Azem, and it's translated by Sinan and Antoon, and this story begins with the premise of what would happen if all Palestinian Arabs vanished from the state of Israel. And it plays this out in a very dramatic way when suddenly this just occurs, and there's no particular explanation for it. It just happens, and then it follows through with the events of what would be the repercussions of this, both in the short term and in the long term, and it traces the impacts upon this in the community and the larger society, but specifically between two individuals. There is Allah and there is Ariel, and they are friends who, though they are Israeli and Palestinian, they have a friendship with each other. They are neighbors. And when Allah disappears, Ariel kind of investigates what happened to his friend, but he's also a journalist, and he's also investigating why did this occur, and what are the repercussions of it, and how it follows that is very surprising and gave me such a different perspective on both the larger events of the world, but also thinking about our connections and friendships with each other, and how there may be conditions on those which we don't consider in our daily life, but when circumstances happen, that these come to the forefront. And so it's very confrontational in a certain way, but is also so imaginative how it explores these larger issues and ways of thinking about both this specific conflict, but also larger other conflicts that are occurring in the world and in our communities and in our own lives. And so I think it is so artfully done and really spectacular story. Stag Dance by Torrey Peters. And I had so much fun reading this book, this collection of short stories or novellas or however you want to classify them, these tales which consider trans experience from the past and the present and into the future in a way which is so creative and lively and disarming, and that really makes me think about things from a different angle and gives such a different slant on experience in this way, I think is so tremendous. And I think probably my favorite story is one that's set at a boarding school that traces the relationship and connection between two individuals. It's called The Chaser, and it's where a kind of traditionally like masculine, supposedly heterosexual guy forms a connection with his roommate, who's much softer, and how it traces their sexual connection with each other and their intense relationship over time, and but how all of these tales explore relationships and betrayal and different senses of community and our shifting sense of this and our shifting sense of our own identities over time. I think it's so insightful and intelligent, but also really lively, and I just had such a great time reading these stories, and it was such a pleasure. And also I got to see the author Torrey Peters talk about this book, and she is so insightful in her exploration of both storytelling and writing, but also larger political issues, and it's something that I think we need to think about, especially with recent laws that have been passed this year in the UK, that we all need to be thinking about and standing up for trans rights. Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell. And this story really struck me to the heart as it follows a woman who is married to a very charismatic and much loved man, but he is also controlling and manipulative and abusive, and she leaves him one day with their two young children and the struggle and difficulty for trying to establish her own independence outside of this relationship. And it follows this in a real moment-to-moment way of the stress and the tribulations that she goes through, and it's so moving, but also really insightful to show the actual process of this and how heartbreakingly difficult it is. And I was just completely gripped throughout this entire story, and it gave me such a different perspective that I haven't had before, and I'm really grateful to it for that. Under the Eye of the Big Bird by Hiromi Kawakami, and it's translated by Asa Yoneda. And this story really caught me off guard because it's a novel written in a way that I'm really not accustomed to, and that I had to almost adjust the way that I read a book to understand it and get into it. But once I did, I was so into it and really marveled at the different perspective that this gives on the trajectory of the human race, but also life and individuals over a long period of time. So it is made up of different sections from different periods of time where society and the human race have been altered in a way which is very different from our life today, and it considers issues to do with artificial intelligence and how that can be incorporated into our lives, but also and the dangers of that, but also the ways that it can sustain life over a long period of time. But then ask these almost philosophical questions about, well, then what is it that makes humans and makes us individuals? And there are so many teasing and tantalizing questions to this story that are subtly raised over time, and it made me want to go back through it to try to find the different connections between these different sections or different islands of the story and how they all fitted together, or even if they do fit together, and but also, so it's kind of like a big puzzle in this way, but it is also raises all of these points which I've still left me considering and thinking about and pondering in so many different ways. It's such a radical different way of storytelling that I found vibrant and exciting and completely gripping. And finally, there is a novel that I read very recently, but that I was completely enraptured by, and that is Joyce Carol Oates' most recent novel, Fox. And this story is a kind of mystery where at the very beginning of it, a body is discovered and there's a number of suspects, and there's a detective that is conducting an investigation, and he interviews a number of different people in this town in New Jersey, and it centers around a private middle school and a charismatic man named Francis Fox, who charms a number of the local girls and who preys upon them. And so it's a very disturbing story in some ways, and the way it explores this man's personality and character and what he does, but also the lives of people around him and how they have fallen under his influence and fallen in love with him, and the question of how this can happen, of someone who commits such monstrous acts can be such a beloved individual. And so it raises these larger disturbing questions outside of the confines of the story itself, and how Oates explores this in her way, getting so far into the psychological detail of her characters in the way that she does in her storytelling, I think is just tremendous. And the way that she explores these dark corners of American life, because this character, Francis Fox, he is based on a real person and a real incident from the past, and so I think Oates is just fearless in doing this, even though just recently she turned 87 years old, and in my recent talk with her, I was lucky enough to interview her again, and I'll put a link to that below. She is so insightful and so on the ball. I'm just in awe of her work, and I think she is incredible. So those are my top books that I've read so far this year, and like I said, I'd love to hear in the comments below your own recommendations. What would you suggest that I read next? But I would also love to hear if you have read any of these books, and if you agree with me or disagree with me, or if you're interested in reading any of these books now, please let me know about that. But I hope you're doing well and your year is going well so far, and you're reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.